If you really want to stop feeling anxious, then breathing's probably your most direct route to get that.
Go into the darkness to find the light.
Right? So anxiety is not a bad thing. Anxiety was a survival mechanism.
One of the things I've realized, I don't think human beings really want it to be quiet.
How do you get to the point where you can regulate yourself in the most accurate, most direct way possible?
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet.
All right. Man, it's good to have you here, Clay.
It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming. Just so everybody knows, I have Clay Moffat here today that has joined us on The Spiritual Capitalist. My name is Dalton Locke, and I'll be your host. And I've known Clay now since the pandemic, correct?
I think just before.
Just before the pandemic.
Before the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really interesting. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background here on Clay, Clay has an amazing gift. He has this gift that wasn't just given to him. It's something that actually he earned and he put a lot of work into. But before I tell you what it is, I'd like for him to give you a little bit of background on how he came about a lot of the work he does and how he's able to help very high-performing individuals.
How it came about, the work? Well, that's an interesting story.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, truth be told, I never got into this kind of work to actually help anyone else.
Fair.
Right? The whole journey started because I was just constantly hitting walls, you know? I was never getting ahead, or I was getting ahead, but then, like, to get to that next level, I'd mess it up. Like, my attitude would mess it up. My emotions would mess it up. My responses were technically, they weren't responses, they were reactions. And I was looking for a way out. I was looking for a way to actually learn how to communicate effectively because I lacked tact and I was just, like, too blunt. And I'm still very direct.
I would agree with you
Though,
on that.
compared to before, like, I have the flexibility now to not be direct as, like, a choice. My default's still direct, but I have a choice now. And there was a couple of years where I was just, like, learning language patterns, and I was studying seduction because that's one of the best places to find language patterns, right? And so I was going through the motions, and I was getting very limited results. And then I was reading, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. It'll come back to me. I was reading a specific book, and they started talking about NLP. So at this stage, I hadn't done anything in NLP. It was just language patterns. Like, okay. And the core fundamental of this book was like, look, you can be a wizard at all these other things, but if you're still kind of a piece of crap, then you're not going to get results.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so I guess I'm still kind of a piece of crap and I should probably go do that. And so I went down the path of, like, uncovering what was, like, making all these decisions and all these responses and all these reactions. And it was a very long and extinguished process that I don't think is ever going to finish. Like, I'm still on that process now, you know?
Yep. That's one of the things I've noticed about you, Clay. And just so people know that have never heard the terminology NLP, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a terminology that I don't think a lot of our listeners know what that is. What is that?
So it comes, it's Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and it's basically a set of tools and a set of techniques that create behavior change, or can create behavior change, right? They don't always. It depends on, like, the application, the intention, the use, and the operator. But that's, in essence, what they're designed to do. And it was started in around about the 70s and basically came off modeling, like, the best therapists. And they started to break down, like, what is the core elements that these therapists are using that gets them results that beat everyone else. And that's how it got founded. So,
Got it. Yeah, it's really interesting when we look at NLP because NLP, hypnosis, all these different ways of rewiring and really changing the mindset, changing the mind and going internal. A lot of people don't believe that this even works. I'm sure you've experienced this a lot in your line of work.
Well, I mean, I've had clients say to me, look, this doesn't work and I know it's not going to work, so why am I even doing it? I said, well, don't. Like, don't bother doing it then. It's fine. Like, but the skeptical people, and this is the difference between someone that's closed-minded and someone that's skeptical. Skeptical people, I find, are always the clients that are like the most appreciative and the most grateful because they're open to the idea of it working, right? But like, I just don't think it's going to work for me. And then they go through a process and like, oh, it works for me. Okay, this is cool. And then they're fully bought in, and then off they go and they go running. And it just really depends on, well, your openness and your ability to change, your desire to change, and the skill of the person that you're working with.
Got it.
So
yeah, that makes sense. So that the listeners know, about 3-4 years ago, roughly, maybe I don't remember, about something like that, I ended up actually hiring on Clay because I was at a place in my life where I had done a bunch of training, a lot of different personal development work and so on, and I knew about hypnosis and I knew about NLP, but there was something very unique about Clay that I was looking to kind of push some of my limits, I guess you could say. What was your experience, Clay, of working with me? Just from a perspective, I'd like to know that because, you know, we've obviously been working together for a long time now. And what was your experience when we started talking and when I came to you and what I wanted to do and what you've seen from the time and period we worked together?
So when you first came, you were confused in the direction that was going to be the truest for you, right? Because you had a lot of direction, you had a lot of options.
Sure.
Though what I found was like the most obvious was that like you had probably too much choice.
Fair.
And having all that choice then was getting reflected on a set of core values that no longer aligned with who you were. And a lot of the shifts that you made has started to bring out, this is going to sound very woo-woo, but like your real core values. So everyone runs on core values, right? Though when you start like moving forward through things, what typically tends to happen is a lot of people will be motivated by running away from the fire, right? Or running away from the accident, or like just moving away from something. And when you start to peel the layers back and you start to pull everything apart, what starts to really open up is you get this connection with what is really motivating you. What was there at the beginning, as opposed to what you got told or what you got conditioned to have as a value or conditioned to believe. And then when you start to peel back those layers, then you start to, well, like you've experienced, you start to bring about like what I would call effortless success, because you start to breed this this sense of congruence. It's a word I like, because
I love that word, actually.
It's like everything comes together and everything fits. And so one of the things I talk about is on like it's a 3-axis. So because my background's engineering, right? So we've got the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis, right, which gives depth. And the x-axis, and the idea is like presence, and you want to center your presence, okay? And centering gives you more energy and more power, because what happens is most people are distracted. So on the x-axis, you want to be in the center, and the center is being in the present moment. Some people live out in the future, some people live in the past, and the more frequently you can be on that center point in the present moment, the more energy, the more power, the more drive you're going to have. Then on the y-axis, you're going to have your nervous system, okay? And your nervous system is going to be in a state of like excitation, like activated, aware, or it's going to be in a state of collapse, or it's going to be in a state of safe, social, connected. And so obviously up here, you've got excessive reactions in your fight and flight. Down here, you're collapsing, you're shutting down, and you want to be in that center. And then the next one is depth, and that's your responses to the world. So you can either have excessive responses, you can have responses that are lacking, or you can have responses that are measured. And so traumas and social conditioning and social constructs and all these things will start to frame this. And the way I look at it is like if you take like a globe, like a ball, a sphere, and you put that sphere on that axis with the center point here, the more people are away, it's the same amount of energy that you have, right? It's all the same amount of energy. But when you start to condense that down, it's the same amount of energy that's now condensed. And the smaller you make that ball, the more powerful it is. And the harder it is for people to knock you off because now you've got the same amount of energy, but it's like it's dense and it's powerful. And so I think everyone really has the same amount of energy, really. But it's just there's so many people who are just spread out too thin.
Not focused, right?
Right.
And yeah, I would say that when you and I met, I don't know if I was focused, not to the same level I believe that I am today. And when you and I met, I had all these different random phobias, like weird phobias. Like
There's no weird phobia. Easy. Right? People get phobias based on their experience, right?
Yeah, for
so,
sure.
like I learned the hard way, right? My ex-wife, really amazing woman. Still love her to bits. Like we're great friends. She is petrified of rats.
Okay.
To the point where when we were in Bangkok, we're walking down the side of a street, a rat was coming towards us and she pushed me onto the road. I got hit by a car so she could get out of the way of rats, right? Extreme response. Now, me, stupidly, foolishly enough, back when I knew everything, right? Told her that her phobia of rats was not as strong as my mum's phobia of snakes. My mum's petrified of snakes, which was the dumbest thing ever. And the reason I bring this up is like there's no stupid phobia and all phobias are equal because they're all relevant to the person.
Yeah,
right.
That's fair. And there's something that goes on internally when we have fears, right? So what was interesting that kind of bringing it into, because I know a lot of the people are listening to our podcast are people that are running businesses or they're trying to figure out a way like how do we mend these two. And one of the conversations I had recently, which is fascinating, we're having this conversation today, is a gentleman I've known for years. I mean, a long time. He's brilliant. He's capable. He's talented. He's a good father. He has all of these really good, strong assets to him.
Right.
And I have attempted over a period of time, years ago, to start businesses and do different ventures with him. And we'll get about 60% of the way and he'll pull the cord and he'll run. And so recently I sent him a text message and I said, listen, what are you so afraid of that you're not willing to like continue this process? You're capable, you're willing, you've got great ideas, but for some reason there is something inside of you that is not allowing you to push towards your greatness. And that's one of the gifts I feel like you have, is that you have this ability to be able to show people, listen, what is it you want? How do you want to get there? And let me guide you on that path, right? Why do you think there's so many people that know that they have this talent, whatever it might be? This case, it's business,
right?
But whatever it might be, like what's holding them back from really pushing there? Because for me, I know when we started working together years ago, I was petrified of driving, which is something the whole world does, right? And I've now done race car driving, and I was down in the, I remember telling you I was down in Mexico in the Baja 500 and you know, riding that and doing a lot of different things that there's no way before the old version of me would have ever done. That doesn't mean I still don't have a little bit of fear. It doesn't mean that I'm still not very concerned, but it means I do it anyways. And so what is the skill or what is the technique or what is something that our listeners can take away that when they don't want to do something or there's that fear going on inside of them that is just pulling them so hard that they're like, rather than going, they shut the door and they make excuses or they just say, oh, not today, but they're never going to do it.
Right.
So what's happening there?
It's multiple things at the same time, really. They've got a lot of mental evidence that they've repeated taking a chance before and like something went wrong. And so now they're forecasting that failure out into the future and they don't bank on themselves because it's familiar. And so a lot of people say like, you got to stay in the comfort zone. But how many people do you know that like are really uncomfortable yet still don't take the chance?
So many people.
Right. So it's got nothing to do with the comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's about what's familiar and what's familiar to your nervous system, right? So the nervous system is, and if you start going down into like how the mind works, as best as I understand, the mind's number one job is to keep you safe. And familiarity is safe. Might not be comfortable, right? So like the lady who's with an abusive partner who beats the heck out of her, right?
Yep.
That's not really comfortable, but it's familiar, so it's safe. The saying, what is it? Better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
It's one of my favorites.
That's like a perfect analogy for the nervous system. This is familiar. This is what I know. I can survive this, and the nervous system is wired to survive.
Got it.
Right? It's not wired to thrive. We're not wired to thrive. Evolutionally, we are wired to survive, pass on the genes, and keep going. That's it. And then we can overcome that and shift into thriving because we get the needs met, and we start like climbing up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we start moving forward. But typically speaking, that's not what the nervous system is designed to do. It's designed to survive. That's it.
Got it. So then these people, just like myself, there are things inside or traumas or past which we've gone through and seen that until those things are healed,
Right.
or until they are met face to face, people are going to continue to do the same things.
Yeah.
Within the most part. So why do you think we talked about this earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big fan of rewiring the mind. I'm a big fan of putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions, plant-based medicines, hypnosis, meditation, like all the stuff it takes to rewire. But one of the things I've noticed the most about majority of this work, including something it's called TR, or what is it? It's
TRE.
TRE,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll talk about in a second. But TRE, all of it, a lot of this stuff is uncomfortable. Like it's not comfortable. Drinking ayahuasca in the middle of
not comfortable.
jungle is not comfortable. Like these things aren't comfortable. But what I have found the most for me personally is that in order to get past my darkness, I need to go in, or to find the light, I should say.
Yeah.
I have to go into the darkness.
Right.
And the deeper I go into the darkness, the more the light is there. There's I was once told a while ago when I was sharing with you earlier that you live in Thailand, right?
Yep.
And there's temples all over, and they have all these different statues and different things like that. But there's a story that says that basically they have demons around these temples.
Mm-hmm.
And around the temples, they have these demons are holding a box.
Mm-hmm.
And in the box is the greatest gift, because they know most people are not willing to go into the darkness to find the light.
Right.
Why are so many people afraid? Like, because I know that you'll be talking to people, and what's some of the common things you hear when you're like, hey, listen, we can do these things, but what do people tell you of their excuses? Like, why I don't want to do this?
Well, a lot of the times it's not necessarily the excuse that they don't want to do it. They're just not aware of the benefit they're getting from the poor behavior.
I agree.
Right? A lot of there's that. So in hypnosis, they talk about, and it's not just hypnosis, but psychotherapy, psychology, they talk about secondary gain. So the most obvious for this is an example when I was working with this guy who was smoking, and his wife was like pestering him to quit smoking. And he was like, I'm having a bar of it. But to keep the peace, he came in to see me, and like, so I could hypnotize him, right? But he wasn't interested in that. And so we started talking about it. And I said, okay, so let's just break it down. Like, why do you smoke? He's like, well, I just want to. I'm like, no, come on, man. Like, let's just be real. And what it came down to was the fact that it was the only alone time he got. His boss wouldn't come bother him at work. His wife wouldn't come nag because he stank, and his kids would leave him alone. And like, it was like his 15 to 30 minutes of sanctuary at work and his 15 to 30 minutes of sanctuary at home. And so he needed alone time.
That was a secondary gain then, correct?
Right. And it was like super important to him. So I said, look, what if you just turn around and you create a binding agreement with your wife and with your boss that you'll still continue work, you still continue to do this, and they're to give you your space. And during that space, they don't interrupt, they don't anything. He's like, whoa. And I said, look, just test it. And if they break the agreement, go back to smoking. Like, whatever. And so we didn't do any hypnosis, nothing like that. They set up an agreement. His wife agreed to give him like this 30 minutes here and 30 minutes there on the weekends. And his boss agreed to give him like 2 breaks, blah, blah, blah. Quit smoking overnight.
Wow.
Because he got the need fulfilled, right? He got what was actually there going on. So for years, he's telling everyone, I don't want to quit smoking. But really what he was saying is like, I don't want to give up my space.
That space. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, is finding that secondary gain of what is there. One of the secondary gains when we started working together years ago, which is fascinating to me as I look back at it now, is I don't know if I chose or we started talking about it or how exciting it was. I'm sure I did choose it, though. I'm not saying that you said, oh, we're going to do this, because that's not how you work. but to have adventure. And I said, hey, Clay, I want to have adventure. And so we worked together on something about having adventure and stepping out of out of fear. And since then, you and I talk. You sent me that cartoon of this guy in Machu Picchu. I believe I said that correctly. And it was like a Simpson little kind of character. And it was me. It was so cool. And since then, I've been to Egypt and Costa Rica. And I've been all over, Italy, not Italy, excuse me, Spain and Greece and
Egypt.
Egypt. Yeah. Yeah. Egypt that's another story. That's another story. But yeah, like all over the world, I'm experiencing different cultures and beliefs and mass amounts of adventure,
Right.
and the guy before that sat here would not have been that guy. And so I look back and I think, man, how did I get from here to here? And also if I got from here to here in the last couple of years, where else can I go? Like what else am I capable of? I do want to talk about something though that I find fascinating. And most people have never heard of this program that you offer because one, you're very selective because you realize that if people don't really have the desire or the intention to shift and change, that's not your person. If someone is not really your kind of an individual you're going to want to hang out with, because you have a program called The Switch, which is a lifelong commitment.
Right.
And earlier, what nobody saw here is when you showed up today, you flew in from Thailand, you saw some of your clients while you're here in the States, you said, hey, listen, I'm going to be here. I'm going to stop by and see you. You flew here and you kept your word, which good on you, man. It made me so emotional. And that you have some things we want to update. And when I say we want to update, when I went down a year ago, 2 years ago?
About 18 months ago, Puerto Vallarta. Yeah.
Went to Puerto Vallarta and went down there. And basically for several days, we worked on a technique. And that technique has allowed me to move emotion and information and blockages through my body. That's something it's very hard to explain. It's almost like putting your whole body into it feels like a seizure. I mean, I've never had a seizure, but it really feels like when your body is shaking and convulsing, that's what's going on. Because you showed me a video of an animal, and it was a polar bear. Yep, the polar bear. And the polar bear is running, and all of a sudden you see a guy in a helicopter, and he shoots the polar bear. Polar bear falls down.
With a dart.
With a dart. Yeah, thank you. He doesn't die. Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. But he falls down, and because he's going through trauma, his body starts to like convulse, starts to shake, right? And you told me that's what children do.
That's what every mammal does.
Interesting.
It's a mammalian reflex.
But what happens and why do what is going on here that we don't do this? Because obviously I know from my own experience it cleans out the nervous system.
Right. But we're also conditioned not to shake, right? We're told you got to hold it together, you got to keep hold of yourself. And so
that's definitely true.
David Baselli is the guy that uncovered this, right?
Okay.
And he was in a lot of different war zones, and he started to notice a trend between children that shook, after traumatic events, and the ones that didn't. And the ones that did shake and naturally released all the stress and all the tension in their body typically didn't end up with PTSD. The ones that held it in did. And so he started doing more research, and he figured out a way to activate. It's basically activating the psoas muscle is really what it comes down to. And when you activate the psoas muscle, it's a muscle that typically doesn't get activated in our general day-to-day life. So there's a lot of stored tension and a lot of stored pressure there. And for whatever reason, I'm not really sure about the neurobiology and how it specifically works. But when you start activating this and you release that tension, what starts to happen is you start releasing waves of stored emotion and waves of stored, you can call it energy or whatever you want to call the measurement of it. But you can be having this full-on experience where you're laughing and crying and feeling just insane amounts of rage just releasing through your body while you're laughing and crying. Because
I had that experience.
Exactly.
You remember that. I was crying, I was screaming, I was making very, we'll call it animal noises, and it was all uncontrollable.
It's primal stuff.
It was very primal.
Yeah,
it was extremely primal. So tell the listeners about the Switch. This is something that's so unique that it's not on a website anywhere. I don't know anybody that really offers this. And what's even more fascinating about this is that you wish that you could figure out a way to do the Switch to yourself, but you've studied it so much and you've perfected this skill set that you work with very high performers. We won't name the clients, but some big people. They're doing some incredible things in this world because they're being put under immense amount of, up until this point, stress, but they want to perform at these really high levels. But let's face it, like life sometimes, right? And there's people that we know that are internally inside of ourselves that we want to pull out. And so looking at the switch, and again, I want to get back to that, is the thought for me as we move into this is a lot of human beings think that where or who I am and the way I am. So I'm a person that has anxiety. I am this, I am that. Like all of these nice little labels they put on themselves and they start to put everywhere, whatever it is. They think there's no way to change.
Right.
And we were talking about this before off camera, and that is that, some people are wired to be one way because of their life experiences, DNA, whatever we want to call it. But you told me very clearly that that's not the case.
No, I don't believe so at all. Like we all have predispositions to certain things. Like you can have has a predisposition for anxiety. You can have one for depression. You can have one for a whole bunch of things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have anxiety or depression or anything like that. It's going to depend on a lot of other factors as well. And you can change a lot of things too. So the switch, interesting.
It's already been an interesting interview.
Well, so that process is a way to basically reset the scorecard. So it developed out of a bunch of processes that I learned and experienced, not necessarily that I underwent, but I went and I trained to learn how to do. So I went and learned this one process, which is called sanctuary, right? And basically you go and you build this sanctuary, and then within this sanctuary you build like a learning place, and you do this other thing.
Just to be clear though, when he says you build this, he's not talking about a physical place that you're building.
In your brain. Yeah.
This is all internal through different types of trance, meditation, and so forth. And it is very much very real. You're in these places and you're building relationships within these spaces to do certain activities and things that you can then apply to your own life.
Yeah, it's a mental construct, right? But if you think about it, like everything's a mental construct for us anyway, right? There's like 7 billion realities going on at the same time simultaneously. So unless we're all sharing the same reality, everything's a construct, because what you see is a delusion, what I see is a delusion. Everyone's delusional. It's just, is it useful or not? So the switch is a way of like resetting the scorecard and making your delusions useful so that everything starts working for you instead of against you. And that's kind of where the process came from. So there was another process which is probably a bit taboo. So I went and learned from one of my mentors. I don't know if he wants me to mention his name, so I'll leave it off. But if people ask, I'll tell them.
Yeah, this is a very interesting subject. I'm glad we're talking about this because I know where we're going.
So he developed like a hypnotic sexual slave protocol.
Right.
And so I went to study it because I wanted to see like, how else can I use this? Because if you can take someone who is willing and wants to like become like a completely different person, then you must be able to do that in business, in sports, in everything else. And so I took the process. I'm like, okay, let me see how I can change this and what I can do to like build it in. So I then took the sanctuary and I took that and I took some other things. Okay, like how do we put this all together and create this system so that it's repeatable, it's reliable, and people can activate it on command and like have this alter ego take over.
How do you create it? And you're not really creating anything but with what you want in yourself. Like so think about a way when someone is going to say that they're performing at a very high level in sports,
right?
And they get to that point in time where they need to make that shot. And sometimes maybe when they know they need to make the shot, there's some unconfidence in them. There's something going on internal them. And what if they could imagine for one moment that they're Michael Jordan? And somehow or another, they could just like kind of tie that into
they'd be better than Michael Jordan.
Well,
right? That's the point. So the whole point of this is like, no disrespect to Michael Jordan, so we're clear.
I mean, Michael Jordan is,
like, it's
is
the best,
GOAT,
best.
right?
Like,
to he's
me,
the GOAT, right?
absolutely.
So, okay.
No
good.
discussion with the Black Mamba, no discussion with anyone else. Sorry. MJ takes it.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to get some hate for that, but that's fine.
That's okay.
So it's not about necessarily being better than Michael Jackson in the sense. It's about that
Definitely
person.
not Michael Jackson.
Oh, sorry, Michael Jordan. Definitely not Michael Jackson. That's the king of pop. That's a whole nother story. So anyway, no, like it's about like them having the ability to isolate everything else around them and just focus on the one thing that they're doing. So they exist in a vacuum in that moment. Like when people say nothing exists in a vacuum, you can exist in a vacuum. You can clear all your thoughts. You can clear all the negativity. You can clear all the problems. And you then have this singular focus, which is, to me, it's actually what the idea of hypnosis is, right? Hypnosis is monoideism. It's like a singular focus. And this is something that you can have as a resource to activate and turn on so that in that moment, you hit the mark every time.
One of the things I really love about you, Clay, is the fact that you were working with a gentleman and he was taking people that were willing to, and usually very wealthy people, to become like sex slaves. Like that they were willing, they were wanting, they were like, they just wanted to be extremely submissive, like kind of a BDSM type thing, right? We've talked about this. That's exactly
what it is, yeah.
So you could have taken that same road and you didn't. Like you took a road of like, how do I take this? And no judgment to anybody else, whatever they want to do with their lives. But you took it from a perspective of what I believe really spiritual capitalism is, and that is you took something that was needed in the world. You took something where you're a servant to your people because, man, I don't know anybody that studies as much as you study. I mean, you're constantly always sharpening things, right? And so you could have went another route, but you chose to lift people up. You know, you chose to be more of, I'll call it a light in this world and to be more impactful in this world because what I love is that you're working with impactful people that are doing impactful things.
Right.
And the fact is that you're not the king, even though I kind of see you this way in what you do, but you're more the king maker. And so behind the scenes,
like a jester in the background.
I know how you see yourself. I know how I see you. It's very different. But I just watched the way that you have impacted people. So first, I just want to say thank you because you've impacted my life. And also I see the way you've impacted other people's lives, right? And so you could have chose one path, but you chose a very separate path.
Well,
and that says a lot about you.
The other path that I could have gone down is still actually equally rewarding, right? So think about it. If you look at a lot of things in the world, like there is a lot of repressed sexuality in the world.
There's a lot of
right?
That, yes.
And that then causes a whole bunch of other dysfunctions. And so by creating the path for allowing people to express like their sexuality like that is extremely liberating, extremely powerful for a lot of people.
Sure.
So it is actually quite a positive thing. I'm not suggesting you're saying it wasn't.
Yeah.
It is also allowing people to step into the light through a different means, right? How do I help people? And specifically, how do I help I work with women as well, but how do I help men? So my experience so far in coaching, hypnosis, whatever you want to call it, is that there are a good amount of men who are afraid of change. And they're more resistant to change, especially way more resistant than women. And this is the first time I've ever admitted this publicly. I set up all my productivity systems and everything because men will happily pay to go and become more productive and make more money and do these things. And then what comes along with that is like all this change work.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like a bait and switch, but it's not.
Sure.
Because they actually get everything they want. They get they become 10 times faster and 10 times more productive, make more money. They get all those things. It's just selling them, hey, there's this cool mindset thing you can do. And they're just not really interested in that.
Right.
But they're absolutely interested in the end result. And so I take them through the process to get there. And like I said, I've got no exclusions. I love working with both women and men. I think, typically speaking, women are actually, with the exception of yourself, you're very open. And I tend to filter for that because I've run aground a few times when I'm like, I'm just going to help everyone. And then crashed and burned and took all my energy try and help someone that, truth be told, didn't really want change.
I have been there more times than I can count.
Yeah.
Yep. I was told not too long ago, listen, you don't need to be Jesus. Oh, man, did that one sting? Oh, that one sting. But, it's also when you see somebody that is hurting and and you see greatness in them, and you're like, man, I really want to like get you. I know what's inside of you. I want to pull that out of you. And then they're just like, man. But then I had to also realize that that's their path and
Right.
that's their choice. And it is not up for me or you or anybody to take away their agency on that stuff, because they'll get there when they get there. You know, I firmly believe that we will get to where we need to go, and we've chosen a lot of our path. And I firmly believe that we create our reality.
Right.
And because of that, one of the things that a big core belief of mine is, as far as in spiritual capitalism, is that we have to listen first to our intuition.
Mm-hmm.
But most people can't listen to their intuition, or they can't hear this voice, or it doesn't matter what we call it, a higher source, higher wisdom, inner wisdom, and there's all kinds of words for it. It's because those channels are not clean.
Right.
They're not cleared out. And I believe one of the major focuses, or one of the tools, is clearing out the channel is the work that you do, is clearing out that channel and giving it to the point in time to where we can remove. And I think plant-based medicine does this, life transformation does this, and I do it all the time. As you said earlier, there is no ending to this stuff.
Right.
There's only evolving or learning a little bit more and just getting a little bit more on that things. And I think that it's not about more is better, but it is also making sure that every single year, as life happens, as traumas happen, as experiences happen, that we go back and we clean those up so for me personally, so I can listen, that's what I call it,
Mm-hmm.
so I can listen to my intuition or my higher self to be able to make sure that I'm headed the direction I want to go,
Right.
right? And so I believe the work you do is extremely beautiful. So two things we can talk about, and you choose, dealer's choice here. If we have two sides. So entrepreneurs, they're faced with a lot of things. They're either faced with indecision, which is one, right?
Mhm.
And that can just be a killer.
Right.
Or I know a lot of entrepreneurs in general, and actually most human beings these days,
Mhm.
they're full of anxiety.
Right.
What is some things that people can do that you believe that's something simple that can help them clear out the channel of this anxiety?
Well, it depends on the kind of anxiety that they're experiencing, right? So anxiety is typically drawn from habitual need to forecast negative outcomes in the future.
Mm.
And so what they're typically doing is they're not actually grounded in now. So if we go back to that sphere, right?
Yep.
They're out here, they're out in the future. So they're like, oh, well, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It's just a constant, it's a habitual negative projection. So the fastest way to start shifting your state is typically through breath work, typically speaking. And most people are not really conscious of where they're breathing anyway, right? And typically speaking, men will breathe in their chest, which is more than often an indication of sympathetic arousal, which is an indication of fight or flight, depending on the extremity of the fight or flight mechanism. So by then shifting to diaphragmatic breathing and breathing through your belly, and then extending your exhale for 2 to 3 times the length of your inhale, you can do it anywhere. You can do it when you're standing in line, you can do it driving a car, you can do it literally anywhere. And you can start to shift from a sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state and have like more of the rest and digest. That will, if you persist with that, start to get your body to relax. Now, the caveat with that is that if you can get your body to relax, which a lot of people can't, not because they can't because they don't shift it, then what can actually start to happen as a side effect of that is like things will start coming up that you need to process so that you can move past and let go of the anxiety. So that then begs the next question. Well, okay, well, what if I'm not ready to deal with this stuff? And like, well, then you're kind of in like this limbo. But if you really want to take care of these things, if you really want to stop feeling anxious, then breathing's probably your most direct route to get that. And if you don't necessarily want to go into more of a parasympathetic dominance, you can do something. This very simple box breathing, right? 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, hold, 5 seconds out, 5 second hold. And then if you do something like that, that's 3 cycles per minute. That's extremely slow breath rate. That's going to be very calm, very composed, and it's balanced too. So you're literally balancing the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system because it's on or off. It's not like, okay, I'm going to have like a bit 50-50. When you're exhaling, your parasympathetic nervous system is dominant. when you're inhaling, your sympathetic nervous system's dominant. And it's not like, oh, we'll do 50-50. It's literally on or off. So one's going to come on, and then it's going to turn off, and this one's going to come on. And so it's about how do you get that balance, so you've got this balance in between the two of them, and then you can start living a more balanced life. So that's probably like the first way. With regards to another way to go through anxiety is to recognize that, first of all, you're not an anxious person. That's probably the first thing. A lot of people think like, well, I'm an anxious person. Like, no, your nervous system is responding with anxiety. They're two very different things. And what you can start to do is by creating that gap mentally first, but then physically second, you'll literally start to change the way your synapses fire. So by saying, instead of saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious, you say, my body's responding with anxiety. You start to create this gap. So Viktor Frankl's there, and he created logotherapy, right? Which got born out of the Jewish people being persecuted in like the most horrific of circumstances. And what he discovered was between like the only thing that cannot be taken away from a human being is their ability to choose how to respond, right? And by starting to say these things to yourself, this is not my anxiety, this is my body responding with anxiety. You start to separate and de-identify with the anxiety. And when you start to de-identify with something, you start to create that gap. And then the more you start to create that gap, the more you can be very powerful in your attention, because now you realize it's not you, it's just the body and the way it's been conditioned to respond. If the body's been conditioned to respond a certain way, it's going to respond that way until you condition it into a new way. So then the psychological part of that starts coming into the fact, well, okay, so let's say now I realize that it's just my body responding this way. So it's nothing about me. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm a horrible person. It doesn't mean I'm a weakling or whatever kind of junk someone tells themselves. It's none of that. It just means my body's responding this way, and it's how I've learned to respond. And this is how I've learned to survive. Right? So anxiety is not a bad thing. Anxiety was a survival mechanism. So be grateful for that. And then that leads into like the next segue, which is like how you start retraining the response. So first things first, you're a human being, I'm a human being. You've had an argument before, right?
Many.
Have you ever had an argument with someone and you realize like you got their point of view and you're like, they're right?
Yep.
And then did you ever say, you know what, you're right?
Of course.
Okay, and what happened?
Sometimes it depends. Sometimes I want to continue to argue.
Right. The majority of times?
A lot of times.
They want to continue arguing?
Yeah. I've had people want to continue to argue. Even when you're like, yep, you're right. And I think maybe it's the tonality, and I actually would back that up a little bit, is to say that usually when if I was to say to someone, yep, you know what, you're right, or you're correct, then all of a sudden there's that pause. And there's that pause in there, and then sometimes they'll also turn around and start to look at the other side of the coin.
Right.
They'll look at both sides of it. So I don't know if I'm giving you the answer that you're looking for, but...
No, it's not about the answer that you're looking for. So what I've found in my experience is that when you come across with sincerity, you say, you know what, you're right. It creates that gap. And then you say, thank you. Now you throw that in there, the person feels understood. Once they feel understood, there's no more argument, because they're like, oh, they really get it. Okay. And so it kind of like diffuses the matter.
Yeah, people want to be heard.
Right? Everyone wants to be heard.
Yeah.
And so your mind's no different. So these thoughts are like hammering at you, and they're hammering, and it can feel like there's just this devil inside that's trying to smash out, but really it's not a devil. It's a protection mechanism.
Right.
And when you connect with the fact that it's just something that's trying to protect you, and you go, you know what? You're right. Thank you. Thank you for having my best interest at heart. The voice starts to calm down and starts to shut up. And then now it's about redirection. So like, okay, so what are you really trying to do here? Like, what do you want from me? And you literally, people think I'm crazy because I have conversations with myself. I used to do this. I didn't have anxiety, but I had anger and rage, a lot of it. And this is a process I use to get rid of it. And so I'm like, okay, so like, what is going on here? Like, what are you really trying to do here? Like, well, like this person cut you off and like they endangered us and like this is going here and, you know, like, you need to show them. I'm like, okay, what do you really want to do? Well, I just want to make sure that, like we're okay and we're fine. These are conversations you have like internally. Like, okay, well, we are. And was it necessary to like go to that extreme response? Is there a more efficient way to get to this outcome?
It's the engineer in you.
Just asking the question, right?
Yeah.
And your brain is a loop closing machine. You open a loop, it wants to close it.
Sure.
Right? So by you asking the questions, you might not get an answer straight away, but if you listen, the answer's going to come. And the more you go through this process, the faster the answers come. And what starts to happen is you start to condition your brain, okay, we've gone from here and we're going like on a detour, but we end up getting to here. And then the detours become shorter and shorter, and then eventually the brain just starts responding in this way because it realizes the direction you want to take it. Because you already have shown that it's not you, it's not an identification thing, so you're not identifying with it anymore. You've already created the gap, and now you're leveraging the gap, so you're widening the gap, and you're creating the space for you to go to where you want to go without all the detours.
That is amazing. And I think it's something the listeners can definitely take into consideration there, like how to use that. One of the things I realized when you said that, one of the tools I've used for years is when the monkey mind, the ego, will start to just do what it does, wants to be heard like a kid nagging at your pants. I would always say, you know what? Thank you. I love you. I appreciate this. And I'll take this into consideration. And usually at that point in time, it just kind of subsides, right? Like that. Now we're talking about anxiety. Sometimes when people have a panic attack, that's a whole different thing than what I'm referring to. But it's interesting is you said that you were talking internally to yourself. And I think most people I know were always, there's two different voices going on there constantly, right? There's a monkey mind or the ego or whatever we want to call it, the subconscious and the conscious, and going back and forth, and sometimes having these verbal wars in a way, back and forth. Do you think that's the same way there too? Is that we just simply acknowledge and give love and then allow the pause to happen and then ask, what is it that I want instead?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Me too.
a lot of it comes down to, typically speaking, like your emotional state. And your emotional state will have a huge influence over things. But then it also comes down to your nervous system and the way it's been conditioned. So if you grew up and you were neglected as a child, right? Your nervous system is going to be on edge, literally on edge, thinking that everything is a threat. So before you've even had the chance to think about something, your nervous system is like, oh, that tone, I remember that tone from when I was 4 years old. Boom, this is a threat. Even though it could be the most candid, most honest, most calmest response with no intent behind it in any way that's forceful or aggressive or in any way, shape, or form. But the nervous system will respond that way. Right? So this is why like retraining the nervous system is so important. But most people just not really interested in it. Or they don't know about it. One of those two. Because it takes time. Right? It's not like you can just go, oh, you know what?
Oh, no, it's a lot of work.
Even with psychedelics, right? Which is like a very, very fast way to start the process.
Yes.
It only opens a door and you still need to continue doing the work afterwards, right? And so
Yes, the integration side. A lot of people think, oh, I've went and drank, ayahuasca, or I've done mushrooms or LSD or whatever it is. It does. It breaks apart so much.
Like there's nothing I need to do.
I've got it all figured out.
Everything's fantastic.
I've arrived, no problem. I'm now like holier than everybody else. I got it all figured out.
Yep.
And really though, that's the doorway. It's the opening, the doors of perception, which has been said before many times. But entering into that doors of perception and seeing things for what it is, or realizing that we're making up this whole construct and this whole reality is what we're creating internally, which goes back to your work, which says that like, if we're creating everything in our own reality from our own scope of our own mind, then what else are we powerful to create? Because most people are reacting to a situation, not creating what they truly want. Right. And your work shows you that, and your study and your passion and everything you've put in shows people exactly how to do that. So is there anything else that you can think of today that you would want to just kind of leave the listeners that would be impactful to them on their journey as they continue to move towards their excellence, move towards being a better heart-centered human being?
Well, it depends on what they want to go through. But I think the most important thing is to go down the path of getting your nervous system to be as, let's just say, calm as possible. And it doesn't mean that like you're a nervous wreck or you're angry or anything like that. What it does mean is that you're more measured, you're more in the present, that you have a greater sense and a greater ability to regulate. And that would typically come down to things like mindfulness meditation. Though I get there's a lot of people that are like, you know what, I've tried meditation and it doesn't work. And
Hear that
I
all
am
the time.
one of those people that never worked for, right?
Right.
So because it didn't work for me, I'm like, okay, let me go find a way that I can get it to work.
Yep.
And the issue, I think, is that, first of all, people don't really realize what meditation is. They think that meditation just means that you're sitting there with your legs crossed and your arms open and you're chanting, which, can be meditation, but it doesn't mean that's what it has to be.
There's so many different forms of meditation.
Right.
I think this gets mixed up a lot.
Very much so. The other thing is that people are trying to do meditation and trying to get their mind and like force it into a box. And I'm like, well, okay, that didn't work for me. Like I still have thoughts coming and going through this whole thing. So I'm like, there's another way. So I took a bunch of things that I've read in books, that I've learned from mentors, that I learned from hypnosis training, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And there's a book called The High Performance Mind by Anna Wise. It's a good book. And she teaches this one thing, which is basically like if you ever want to silence this up here, all you have to do is relax the tongue. That's it.
I remember you taught me that.
Right?
Yeah.
And people are like, relax the tongue. How the hell do you do that? It's so simple.
So glad you brought this up.
Just repeat the phrase, tongue, relax. And when you repeat that, you'll notice that your tongue goes down and sits back. And what it does is it just starts to quiet everything upstairs. And it's not going to last forever. It's not going to be like, oh, my mind's quiet forever now. It's not the way it works.
No.
But it will give you that sense of relief. And then what you can also do is you can start using other body-based things, because your vagus nerve sends around about 20%. I always get the directions mixed up. I'm pretty confident 80% goes down, of the information goes down controlling, and 20% roughly comes back up. So it's the feedback coming to the brain. And so what you're doing is, instead of trying to get the brain to control things, which is, like herding cats, what you do is you send signals from the body that indicate relaxation, that indicate parasympathetic dominance. And then those then start telling the brain and going, hey, like, we're relaxed. Hey, we're calm. Hey, we can chill out. And then you leverage your biology to control your psychology to get the end result.
I love it. And I remember that well, as you were speaking about that, about relaxing the tongue. I remember the first time I did that, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then as you were speaking about that, one of the things I've realized, I don't think human beings really want it to be quiet. Like there's something about it, because I've heard people when they've so hape, for instance, right? Hape is tobacco. It's basically it's a snuff.
Yep.
And when people in ceremony, when they give it to you, your brain like automatically just goes click. It's quiet, right? It's like someone just shut the door off. And I've heard people say that scared me. It scared them because it was so quiet in their head. And so I wonder if people are just more comfortable, like we talked about. We do what's comfortable to allow that chatter, to allow those things to go on, because we're so comfortable with it that maybe it keeps us so we don't feel lonely. I know that's not, I would say for me, I enjoy the conversations I typically have with myself because I love myself.
Right.
And then when I see something I don't enjoy, I'm like, okay, where's this coming from? What can I learn from this? And, start to go into more of an inquisitive side instead of a judgment side.
Right.
Because I don't want to put any labels on myself. But what do you think about that? Do you think that people just want that silence? Like they're not that they want it, but they're uncomfortable with that silence. Because I don't remember who said it, but like one of the philosophers said that one of man's greatest fears is to go sit in a cave in silence by himself in the dark.
I think it's got more to do with the fact that they've never experienced it before. Right? And if you can get to the point where you can shut it all out, that can be scary to people, because then there's a whole lot of control that you have that you didn't realize. And some people are actually scared of that level of control. Right? What do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep.
Right? And then like if you have this much power over yourself, then that means you're responsible. You have the agency.
Right.
And if you have the agency, well,
you can't be a victim at that point in time, which you couldn't do this to me. This didn't happen.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to take full, can you imagine that somebody says, listen, I'm taking such, and a gentleman told me this one time, I'm taking such accountability for everything that happens, everything from the fact of all the terrible things. I remember him saying, I sat there during the pandemic and I kept asking myself, how did I create the pandemic?
Right.
That's a level of accountability that most human beings will never understand. But the lessons that can come from that form of accountability, even though it's very difficult, right? Like, how did I create this? This person's sad, this thing's happening. This is part of my play. This is part of my reality that I'm creating. The form of accountability in that is a massive one, man.
It's a beast.
And you've had to do the same thing becoming a dad.
Yeah, that was a trip.
You got a 2-year-old now, and this is one thing I wanted to ask you before we end this interview. And by the way, thank you so much. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm super grateful you came out here to Salt Lake City. I'm grateful for the work that we're going to do today, and I'm grateful that you listened to your own calling, your inner spirit, whatever you want to call it, your intuition, or your mind that said that the work you're doing mattered, and that you didn't just kind of put your toe into this thing. You have spent an immense amount of money and an immense amount of time to hone your craft, which I know the impact that makes. So I really, really do appreciate that. My question I have for you, when your son gets older, right, and he looks back at your life, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think I know what I'm going to be remembered for, being the hard-ass dad. Like, I'm pretty strict with him and with my daughter as well. But like, also, I think it'll be the time that I spend with him and potentially like the principles that I instill. That's what I'd like to be remembered for. Whether that happens or not is another story, right? That's up to him. But like, I started like breathing with him, which is going to sound odd, but I'll get there in a second. I started breathing with him since he was about 6 months old. So
you're very intentional with your children.
Oh, very much so. He whenever he was getting upset, and whenever, even still now, when he gets upset, I'll just say to him, breathe, and I'll breathe with him. It's got to the point now, he'll be 2 in a week or 2. He starts getting upset, he starts breathing by himself.
Amazing.
And like, I never had any emotional regulation really until I was about 28, right? I was just like dead from the neck down. And I thought the whole persuasion element was like my key to like getting what I wanted, but really the key to getting what I wanted is like what most people are afraid of, and that's getting in touch with your emotions, especially most men. But everyone, really, like, to really get in touch with your emotions and realize like you can take that level of accountability and you can start to regulate them and you can feel them, and that like emotions are actually power, and it's a power that you can use and you can tap into, or you can be a victim of it and think, oh, I can't do it. Ideally, I would like to be in a position where both my kids are able to leverage their emotions to get the advantage all the time. And all the time is a very extreme saying, right? But of course, they're going to have like ups and downs, but they're always going to be able to bounce back. They're always going to be able to bring that level to where they want to go. And ultimately, I'd like to be able to like just create that path for them, because who knows what the future's going to hold.
Yeah, and I knew it made more sense in that question, because one of the questions, I just love that question, like, what do you want to be remembered for? I think it's a powerful question, because it lets us see that this life is, the time we have here is limited. And I know for you, you don't really care a lot what people think about you. Like, I see you, like, your biggest work and what I've seen you like really put your energy into, and it does show that like basically our traumas create like our reality, and it creates our impact, which then shifts, which we kind of want to be remembered for, which is such an interesting thing. But I knew the biggest impact for you that you want to see in your life is your children, because I know that at one point in time you basically stepped away from your practice and you just really went in and you just focused on your family and you focused on the things that were important to you. And I see how much energy and time and intentionality you put into it, so much so that when one of your kids was having a temper tantrum in the store, that then you got on the ground and did the exact same thing as a grown man, which, what was that about?
Oh, it's just, that's multiple stages, really. One, to let them know that, like, I don't really care.
Right.
Like, that's just not how you're going to get things. So, like, if you do it, I can do it. 2 was to let them know that it was safe to do that,
Mm.
right? Because they'll do it knowing, but then like, you know,
Goes back to the nervous system, right?
right. So I'm like, okay, yeah, overloaded nervous system, so let's just do it together. And then like, it kind of like, it's a jarring effect, right? It's like Tony Robbins apparently threw a glass of water on someone for a pattern interrupt, which is hilarious, right? But it works because the person, but it snaps them out of their routine.
Right.
And that was kind of the idea behind it, right? To
Got
snap
it.
out of the routine. And like, oh, okay, Dad's just going to do this anyway. Well, that's not going to work. I'm like, you okay? Yeah. Okay, let's go. And just like get out of it.
Man, that's
Actually,
awesome.
I saw an advert on TV here
Okay.
where a lady got down and started having a tantrum on the floor. Yeah, I swear it was here in America. And like the child was like acting out, and so the lady started doing it. I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. Okay. But like it works, right? I mean, now obviously,
I mean, you're a grown giant man on the ground throwing a temper tantrum. It's gonna work.
but like you also got to be kind of put a perspective on this, right? So like if my kids were on the spectrum, that wouldn't have been the thing to do,
That's fair. That's
right?
so
It's all about context,
right.
right? And I felt the context was right. I felt this would work, and I went along with it, and it did. And like my wife gives me a hard time because I say to my son, I was like, crying's not going to solve the problem. She goes, well, you can't tell him not to cry. I said, I didn't say he can't cry. I said, crying's not going to solve the problem. Breathe, get control of your emotions, regulate your emotions, and then you'll find a way out. It's not saying he's not allowed to cry. Like, you're allowed to cry.
Yeah, release
But
that emotion.
I have spent years of my life getting upset and flustered over things because I didn't know how to regulate my emotions, and it just blocked me from like accessing all my brain. Because once your nervous system starts really getting worked up, you start losing access. Your brain starts shutting down. The prefrontal cortex goes out the window. You start reducing into the limbic system. And then when you really get upset, you go down to the brainstem, and like you're losing most of your functionality and most of your ability to think rationally and cognitively. So I said to her, it's not about, oh, you're not allowed to cry. Boys aren't allowed to cry. That's total horseshit for starters. It is about how do you get to the point where you can regulate yourself in the most accurate, the most direct way possible. And that is by focusing on your breathing and breathing yourself into a calm state and staying there. And being able to do that from the time you're 2 years old puts you ahead of everyone else. My personal opinion.
I absolutely agree with you. Being able to have that type of control over the body, to be able to step into a place of calmness. You know, when most intuition comes to people, it's typically in calmness. It's in water. It's in doing, we were talking about meditation earlier. It's in some type of sport. It's in something that is not the doing. It's not the work. It's in these places where we get this this inspired intuition to go do something differently. So what you're saying, I mean, to our listeners, that having those skill sets and taking the time to learn how to breathe and taking the time to go into the things that are uncomfortable to find what you're really made of or what you can be to be who you want to be is really, really powerful. So you've got a couple of things right now that you're doing, right? So you've been built. I mean, you've got a lot of things you've been doing, right? I've been watching you with some of the development work you've been doing over the last couple of years. What's the project you're working on right now? Like, so if our listeners want to get hold of you and find out what you're about and just get a little bit of the exercises and technologies that you've created, how do they find you? What are you up to?
Well, it's like pretty much there's like one or two things. So for the people that want to just dive straight in and go through it all, there's the Yellow Brick Code.
Okay.
And that's like our 12-week coaching program where we, meaning myself or one of my coaches, will guide you through the program. And it's a group program, which also is custom tailored with like individual sessions, like really custom tailored. It's basically, it's everything that culminates your biology, psychology, and technology to start working for you versus against you. Like that's like the 12-week thing. And then like you join once you graduate, you get access to the post-grad program and like you get access for life. That's one thing. The other thing, if you just want to dip your toe in and figure out like what's a good starting point, well, then that'd be the other program we've got, which is Chaos to Clarity. And that's like a whole bundle of programs for less than $30.
That's amazing.
And so then
where's that at? Like, do you have
my
a domain
website?
name? Like,
right,
let's get them there. So if the listeners like, Listen, what you're saying is impactful, and I can see it changing my life. And I realize as someone that wants to either be a high producer or is a high producer and going through all the craziness of what that entails to run a company,
Yep.
to be able to regulate their nervous system, to be able to deal with some of these things, how can they find this?
Maverick Consultancy is the domain, maverickconsultancy.biz, and I think we also bought .pro because I like .pro better than .biz. So
Excellent, man. Well, listen, I can tell you from my own personal beliefs and my own workings of working with Clay, life transformational. I mean, $30 is that's just that's nothing. And the amount of value that you'll get for that is incredible. So follow Clay, learn what he's up to, look at his programs, and if you're really serious about like really even going past that, are you taking on any personal clients anymore? Or is that kind of
it's just selective, that's all.
very selective? Okay.
Yeah.
And same thing, they can go to your website and they can apply to work with you, or how does that
No.
work? They have to go through the yellow.
Yep.
Okay, they have to go through the
Because by going through the yellow brick code, they will get to work with me one-to-one.
got it.
Right. So typically speaking, I run 3 codes a year.
Okay.
And with those 3 codes, there's like 12 people that I'll take through, and they'll get to work with me one-to-one as they run through it.
Okay. That makes sense. So that's the easiest way. And then from there, if they want additional,
They can just sign up, yeah.
got it. And what if someone's looking for the switch? They have to go through that first?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. I get it. I understand why too. All right. Well, like I said, go check out his content. Go see what he's up to. Definitely, if you can, get involved, work with Clay, because he will change your life. If you want to change your life, if you don't, you're happy with where you're at, you have no intention of it, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you do, I highly recommend you check out Clay.